So we have the resource, the research, and the way to make it available to everybody. The main motivation of our gathering and our choice of Haifa is the general theme of the right to urban history. I see Fatima on the screen. We started working on it in connection to Gaza that lost its identity, its history to the Strip. And here it gets a little bit of a different meaning, but still in the same family of concerns, because we want to see how one can identify yourself in the built environment. What kind of a sense of belonging, identity, right to tell your own story where you live. And we were very much excited with the idea there is about the of Haifa is the Haifa Republic, unlike the Jerusalem Kingdom and Tel Aviv state, where it offers really a different kind of citizenship. And we think that by focusing on Haifa in relationship to other places, we can expose these kind of completely new themes that that can allow people to live better and differently in this place. So we are trying to gather it around three main themes. One is actually an ongoing one, and our first speaker was central to building it. It's the knowledge transfer between Central Europe and Palestine, and we have engaged scholars working on it, and there's lots to do. It's a very exciting arena. The other one is response to relational histories, to the idea that things that happens elsewhere are similarly important, and to imagine a space that the national borders did not cut through its territories, and what happens, what were the dynamics then. This is mostly Middle Eastern histories. And the third theme is more around port cities and their infrastructure. And this may be a comparative studies between different geopolitical contexts that share the kind of historical conditions in which Haifa was moving between colonial conditions, different colonialism, and nation state. So I'll try to be very, very brief. The only thing that I want to say is that we are envisioning a series of workshops. We hope to provide a platform for research in progress. So you're all invited to suggest papers. We are committed to find respondents and to generate the discussion and the debate. And our intention is eventually to publish it in our publishing house and potentially in collaboration with other publishers. So let's start. Let's start.
Thank you, Alona. So now it's a pleasure to introduce our first presenters, Dr. Moshe Naor and Professor Abigail Jacobson. Dr. Moshe Naor is a senior lecturer in the Department of Israel Studies at the University of Haifa. He's now talking with us from New Hampshire, I believe, right? His research interests encompass Israeli history, the history of Sephardi and Mizrahi Jewish-Arab relations, and war and society. Professor Abigail Jacobson is an associate professor in the Department of Islamic and Middle Eastern Studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. The research delves into the social and urban history of late Ottoman and mandatory Palestine and the Eastern Mediterranean, with a particular focus on ethnically and nationally mixed spaces and communities, especially during times of war and conflict. So, בבקשה, אביגיל ומשה. You can share if you want.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for inviting us. Thank you, Alona, and thank you, Edith. Can you hear me well? Because I feel that there is some kind of delay. Yes? Okay. I'm sorry that I can't be physically with you. I'm in the Jerusalem Republic, far away. So our talk or presentation today is based on an article that you received, which I hope you read. We are assuming that you did read the article. And we hope to send this article for publication soon. And so we would really appreciate any comments, ideas, both on the theoretical framework as well as on the empirical aspects. And we're both very, very happy to be here and share this with you. I will start and Moshe will continue after me. Alona or Edith, can you make me a co-host so that I can share?
You can share. You can share.
I can share a presentation. Okay, let me just see if it's on. Okay, good. Okay, so I have a few maps. So
we don't see.
No, I didn't share yet. I'll share it in a second. So the article you read is a second in a two parts in let's say a series of two papers. The first of which is supposed to be published this summer, and it's a project in which we try to examine the concept of a trapped neighborhood, or in Hebrew shchuna klua. While trying to connect between the ethno-national aspect and the spatial one. The first article that you haven't read focuses specifically on Musrara neighborhood in Jerusalem. And in the article that you received, we're trying to compare between Musrara and Wadi Salib, between two neighborhoods in the years following the 1948 war, between 1948 and 1967, which is obviously the years of the military rule in Israel, and the years of the Great Migration from North Africa and the Middle Eastern countries to Israel. Musrara and Wadi Salib neighborhood are well known in the Israeli historiography and collective memory, following the two events, really important events that took place in them, the 1959 Wadi Salib events, it's called in the historiography, taking place in the summer of 1959, and the Black Panthers movement, which came out or was organized in the Musrara neighborhood in Jerusalem in the early 1970s. These two events are extremely important and serve as an important aspect of our work, but we're not focusing on them specifically. We're asking somewhat different questions. So this project was initiated by or following the ongoing cooperation and collaboration between Moshe and myself, based on our joint interest in the connection between Palestinian history and Middle East and Mizrahi history in Israel, and in general between the history of the Middle East and of the land of Israel, let's say specifically. In our book Oriental Neighbors, one of the chapters dealt with border neighborhoods, and in the Mizrahi and Palestinian place and condition in them. And it included also questions of transition between boundaries, crossing boundaries. And so in that aspect, the current project on which we're talking today is almost a natural transition from the previous project. So I first want to explain briefly about the theoretization or the concept of trapped neighborhood. So in in the scholarly literature on, especially on the Palestinian citizens of Israel, the concept of trapped minority, which was coined by Professor Dani Rabinovich regarding the Palestinian citizens of Israel, is quite well known. And this is the idea of this concept of trapped minority, is to try and explain the position of the Palestinian minority in Israel as being trapped in a way between the Israeli state and its position as a minority, as a national minority. We're trying to expand this term and this conceptualization to the, we're trying to expand it spatially, also following the article and the call in general of Professor Oren Iftacher of Ben-Gurion University, to try and combine the discussion about the ethno-national tensions with the physical and spatial realities on the ground, specifically in cities. In the article, we're trying to argue, or we argue, that Musrara and Wadi Salib were trapped, okay, in quotation marks, each and every one of them in its own way, in a composition or in an interesting junction of borders, physical and imagined. Musrara neighborhood, and here I'm passing to the, I'll share screen just for a second. Sorry. Can you see can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So in Musrara, what we argue is that Musrara was trapped between the physical border of the divided city, and I'm again reminding you of the periodization. The periodization is between 1948 and 1967, when the city of Jerusalem was divided between East Jerusalem, the eastern part of the city, which was part of the Kingdom of Jordan, and the western part of the city, which was Israel, of course. So Musrara was just on the border between the eastern part of the city and the western part of the city, and was trapped between the physical border of the divided city, which was an actual border, a physical geographical border dividing the city between Israelis and Palestinians. So this is one border, the physical border. And the second border is the ethnic internal border within Jerusalem, a somewhat imagined border between Jewish Jerusalem, within Jewish Jerusalem, which in many, many ways kind of symbolizes the unsuccessful policy of Kur Hituch, of the melting pot policy during the first years of the state of Israel. So if we look at this border over here, and this is Musrara neighborhood, and what we see here is actually the old city of Jerusalem, and this is the physical border which we see over here, part of which was composed of barbed wire, part of which was an actual wall. And here is the border, the imagined border, which is not geographical, but divided in a way the neighborhood between the more western and the other parts of the city. And in the scholarship, or in the memoirs that we and the sources that we found, we saw that that people from Musrara in many ways found it extremely hard to cross the imagined border into the western part of the city, much harder than it was for them to cross, not physically, but cross culturally the eastern part of the border, the physical border to the eastern city. So this is Musrara, very briefly. Wadi Salib, and again here you see again the map of Musrara, the western imagined border, versus the eastern physical border. Wadi Salib, on the other hand, was a different kind of trapped neighborhood. It was a neighborhood that was positioned between the old city of Haifa and the Palestinian past of Haifa, and between Hadar Carmel neighborhood, which I'm sure many of you know, obviously. That is between Upper Haifa, in a way, Hadar Carmel, and Lower Haifa, the old city, between the Palestinian existence and between the Palestinian existence of also Wadi Nisnas and the Jewish existence of the Carmel Mountain. Now, in Musrara neighborhood, the border wasn't only physical and geographical, but also imagined, and it kind of encompassed Musrara both on the eastern side and on its western side. The two borders, both the eastern border and the western border, represent, we argue, the Jewish-Arab existence and nature of the residents of Musrara as people who are positioned on both sides of the border and in the upfront or the frontier and the margins of Jerusalem. And so this trapped life, in a way, between east and west, between upper and lower Musrara, also represent for us the hybrid position or life on the border. Now, as in Musrara, Wadi Salib also represents the way the Israeli space and spatial realities post-1948 were recreated after the erasure of the Palestinian past. Both neighborhoods, both Musrara and Wadi Salib, went through dramatic changes following the War of 1948, from neighborhoods of mainly upper or middle class, Palestinian upper and middle class. They turned into neighborhoods of poor neighborhoods, rundown neighborhoods of mainly immigrants coming from North Africa and the Middle East. In the case of Musrara, in the case of Wadi Salib, we're also talking about a Romanian community, which pretty fast found its way out of the neighborhood because they had the means to get out of the neighborhood, whereas the Middle Eastern inhabitants, new inhabitants, did not manage to get out and stayed in the neighborhood. In both neighborhoods, Musrara and Wadi Salib, the Arab houses were declared as abandoned property based on the Israeli jargon, of course, and were occupied by immigrants from North Africa who lived in very close proximity in those rundown neighborhoods. And in great degree of poverty. Both neighborhoods, as I said earlier, became very well known in Israeli collective memory as the centers of the socio-political revenge and protest of the Mizrahi movement versus or against the Ashkenazi hegemonic elite of the early state of Israel, the Wadi Salib demonstrations in the summer of 1959, and the Black Panthers movement in Musrara at the beginning of the 70s. Like in Musrara, where the kind of the imagined borders between Musrara and West Jerusalem was more difficult to pass for the residents of Musrara because of the internal ethnic tension. In Haifa, the neighborhood Hadar Carmel was kind of perceived as the other, and as a border that cannot be crossed and cannot be bridged. And the dichotomy between the green, organized, well-organized, well-designed neighborhood of Hadar Carmel versus the rundown, poor neighborhood of Wadi Salib was, of course, very, very prominent in the way the Wadi Salib uprising played out in 1959. So we're talking here also about an act and the practice of crossing borders, both physical and imagined. The residents of Musrara and Wadi Salib didn't only live in the margins of the city, but also are parts of a community that were uprooted from their past, from their Arab past, and Moshe will talk about it in a second. Part of the comparison that we're making is the way in which the ethno-national boundaries have been playing out, both on the physical as well as in the imagined way. We're looking at the way life on the border and the dislocation from the Arab environment was taking place. We're looking at ways of crossing borders, both in the physical way as well as, for example, in the sonar way. We're mentioning in the article the way that the residents of Musrara heard the mosque coming from, and the muazzin coming from the eastern part of the city, from the eastern part. And we're looking at questions of memory, of forgiveness, of silencing, of course, the past, etc. So I think I'm going to stop here and move to Moshe.
Thanks, Abigail, for the introduction, and hello, everyone. I'm here at Dartmouth College. Cannot be a much more far place than Israel these times. A very relaxed and beautiful area of New England. And so I will continue in the 10 minutes, 12 minutes that we have for our presentation. And I will start with the film that was directed by the director Nitzan-Shiftan in 1971. I hope that most of you watched this film. Have you heard about the Black Panthers, Mr. Moshe? And this is a very fascinating film that was disappeared and only found it in the early 30 years later. And in his film, Moshe compares also in some way between Wadi Salib and Musrara. He's focusing also on the experience of the children in Musrara. Now, in our paper, we try to go back to the roots of Musrara, and it's a paper that, as Abigail mentioned, going to be published very soon. And we looked about the years of the 50s and 60s. Now, the comparison between Wadi Salib and Musrara wasn't only emphasized after 71. It was already emphasized during the 50s and 60s. We can find expression of this, comparing these two neighborhoods already during the 50s and 60s. And here, I want to focus on several aspects that can explain why they were compared, what is the similarities, but also to place the history of, and here I will focus mainly on Wadi Salib, because also Musrara, we already published something. We are now focusing mainly on the point of view of Wadi Salib, also about the long history of the Mizrahi Jews, the Arab Jews, the Oriental Jews, meaning that we try to look also not as 48 as a beginning. Yeah, we have to look also at the period that pre-48 and look, and this is what we did also regarding Musrara, but also it's very important regarding Wadi Salib, not to start the history, and we're all familiar with the new train, that we can find the roots of Wadi Salib in what we can call East Haifa, about a space that exist before 48 and changed dramatically, but also had a very unique character after 48. So it's not about uptown Haifa and downtown Haifa, it's also West Haifa and East Haifa. And Wadi Salib, it's part of the eastern part, and here we are trying to emphasize also this aspect. So when we compare Wadi Salib to Musrara, there's a lot of similarities that regard to the concept of double border, trapped identities, trapped community, and also the attitude to the past, the existence of the Arab past, the Palestinian past, but also Jewish past. And here I want to, we want also to more emphasize on the Jewish past here, beside the Palestinian Arab past that other scholars were focusing, like Yifat Weiss and so on. So when we speak about the comparison between Wadi Salib and Musrara, we can see the same development following 48. From a middle class, lower or upper middle class Arab community with a small Jewish minority to a very poor and decorative, very poor neighborhood, a periphery neighborhood, border neighborhood, and so on. We can see the changes of Jewish migration and the use of the Arab property of settlement the settlement of Jewish immigrants, mainly from North Africa, and we have a lot of statistics about the character of the population and demography, and we will not have time now to speak about it. But we can see that there is immigration from transit camps, from Ayarot Pituach, development house, to Wadi Salib, and also to Musrara. And we can see that the border is also within these two neighborhoods. We have upper Musrara and down Musrara. And in Wadi Salib, the same. The neighborhood that was close, the border that was close to Adar Carmel was more prestigious than the lower part of Wadi Salib. And we can find the same phenomenon of immigration to the neighborhood and out of the neighborhood. This is what Abigail mentioned about the Romanian Jews. And we can see this kind of patterns of immigration that are very fascinating about the history of these both two neighborhoods. And also later, the reconstruction and the evacuation, mainly of Wadi Salib, that started in 1961 and continued to the 70s. And this is another subject that also very interesting to architecture, about the role of Yaakov ben Sira, Yaakov Fishman as the architecture that was also involved in this process. And then we can find other aspects that can compare. It's about the situation of the children, the education in the neighborhood, the focus on youth groups and stress among children and youth that lives on the border, and all the meaning of living on the border. It's about the status of the parents, the immigrants, in regarding of housing and employment, very similar. And this is why they were also compared. Okay, a very poor neighborhood with the aspects of stress in economic, social life, cultural, and so on. Now, this kind of aspects can be also shown in educational terms, and here we don't have time to expand or speak more about it, but we can see the similarities. Now, beside that, there is also similarity that we can compare, not only between Wadi Salib and Musrara, it's also between the Jewish past. And here we are speaking about the idea of the Melach, because during the 50s and 60s, Wadi Salib, and here we are focusing on Wadi Salib, was described as a Jewish ghetto, as a Melach. And here we can extend and think more about the meaning of Oriental ghetto, about the Jewish neighborhood in the Middle Eastern countries. And you know that the names were Melach in Morocco, Khat El Yahoud in other parts of Syria, Tunisia, Egypt, or Mahalat El Yahoud in Iraq. So we have all kinds of terms that refer to the Jewish quarters in the Arab cities, in the Muslim cities. And it's very interesting the comparison that we can find in the 50s and 60s between Wadi Salib and the Melach, meaning that the Jews of Morocco were trying to look for their solidarity and identity that they recognized from their neighborhood in Morocco. And here we can see the continuity between the period before 48 and the immigration and then in the 50s to the concentrate of these Jews that prefer to go to Wadi Salib and also to Musrara because they are very central neighborhoods. They are different from other neighborhoods that also were on the borders. And the comparison to the Melach and the image of the Melach as the Jewish quarter is very fascinating about Wadi Salib in during this period. Now, here we can see also about the migration that Moroccan Jews prefer to move to Wadi Salib. They chose to do it because of the idea of all kinds of aspects of solidarity and the character of the life with synagogues and we can call it a Jewish community identity. But again, they were trapped because they didn't have the option to go up to the Adar Carmel. Most of them, it's not that all of them. And in the other end, they are trapped with their Arab Jewish past. If it's the Moroccan past, but also we have another comparison and another past, and this is the past of Hart El Yaoud and Ard El Yaoud, two important neighborhoods of Haifa before 48. Now, those of you that are familiar with the geography of Wadi Salib sits below Adar Carmel, but above Hart El Yaoud. Now, Hart El Yaoud was established in the 19th century by Moroccan Jews from Algeria, from the Maghreb, and it was part of the Muslim quarter. Now, the border between Hart El Yaoud and Wadi Salib, it's what we call Mitcham al-Pasha, al-Pasha Street, that most of you are familiar with this street. Now, Wadi Salib and the connection to Hart El Yaoud continue off after 48. And one of the examples is that the schools in Hart El Yaoud, that this was the main Sephardi Mizrahi neighborhood of Haifa before 48, with Alliance School, Yesod Hadat School, religious school, the Jewish community administration and institution, and 5 synagogues of the Jews of Tetuan, of Istanbul, and so on, that you can see the character of this neighborhood. Continue also after 48, and the school that was in Hart El Yaoud moved to Wadi Salib in the 50s and 60s, Bet Yitzchak. Now, another neighborhood is Ard El Yaoud. Now, Ard El Yaoud in the 60s and 50s was called East Wadi Salib. So we have a space, and Ard El Yaoud was established by Jews that left the old city, same as the Muslims that left and created Wadi Salib in the 19th century, the same period. So we have also after 48, another border, the meaning of a space, eastern space that included Hart El Yaoud and Ard El Yaoud that became after 48 part of Wadi Salib. Because in the terminology, you cannot define what is Hart El Yaoud that was destroyed and what remained of Ard El Yaoud, and both of them were regarded to be part of Wadi Salib. So it's very interesting to see that we speak about a space that Jews and Arabs live together. It's obvious that I didn't mention it, but it's a mixed neighborhoods that exist before 48, a mixed space that also continue after 48. Okay, and here we speak mainly about Wadi Nisnas, but we have also all this link from Wadi Salib to Wadi Rushmiya and Khalisa and Chof Shemen that used to be called Ard El Rimal and Ard El Bilan, the other area in Arabic. So it's a mixed area before 48, and in some way also mixed neighborhoods after 48, especially Khalisa, Wadi Nisnas, and Shemen. Okay, so we are trying also to compare in our paper, and this is only a draft what we send, about trapped neighborhoods regarding daily life and living on the border, but also regarding the Palestinian past and also the Arab Jewish past, reflecting, as I mentioned, about the Melech in Morocco, but also on Hart El Yaoud. Okay, so this is our conclusion for our presentation.
Thank you very much, Moshe and Abigail. I would like to invite Dr. Shira Wilkof to offer the first response. Dr. Shira Wilkof is an assistant professor in the Faculty of Architecture and Town Planning at the Technion. Her expertise lies in the history of modern landscape, urban planning, and the environment. Her research interests encompass the transnational history, spatial expert knowledge, environmental history of design, infrastructure studies, and landscape production in Palestine, Israel.
So thank you very much, Irit, and thank you very much, everybody. I am Abigail and Moshe. It's a really wonderful opportunity to finally talk about the paper. And thank you for pulling me out of all the administration and end of semester stuff to really do things that this is why we're here, basically. So I'm really grateful. So let's start. So I really enjoyed reading the paper, especially on a Friday afternoon that my kids were out of the house. It was a double pleasure. So in this paper, Moshe and Abigail examined two neighborhoods that long have become an icon of the Mizrahi struggle in Israel. And they suggest the term Pratt neighborhoods as a way to examine the ethnic, political, social tensions in the urban sphere of Israel in the first decade after after the independence. And they do so by pointing at what they call double border or dual border, but they use double border. And they create a conceptualization of double border in both neighborhoods. And we heard already from Abigail and Moshe, so I won't go over it. So Musrara, we have the Arabs in the kind of lower Musrara, but we also have them across the border, the real political border on the Jordanian side. And then we have the western border, which is between the Mizrahi Jew Musrara and the upper middle class Ashkenazi Jews, maybe veteran in Western Jerusalem. I also think that in this regard, also it will be interesting to think about the Haredi and Mea Shearim and how it complicates the argument and how it refines the argument in this context. And in Wadi Salib, we have this dual border between Hadar, the Yeke kind of Kaufman's flagship neighborhood, the upper middle class Jews, and so-called Arab Haifa, which consists both of the depopulated area in the lower city in Ba'ir Tachtit that represents the Palestinian past, but also the Palestinian presence in Wadi Nisnas as part of their ghettoization, and these two kind of, I would say, sister neighborhoods that Moshe talked about. I think also, and I'm not quite sure, probably Moshe has a better idea than me, how to think about the topography, but it's very clear that somehow the topography enters into the picture, and Haifa, and maybe Moshe or the architect can come up with more kind of like refinement about the topography and the, the stratification. We talk a lot about this in terms of Jews and Palestinians. Maybe we can complicate the picture by also kind of introducing the Mizrahi Jews as a second, intermediary category. But I'm continuing. I think that the choice of these two neighborhoods is brilliant. I think the fact that they are they are so present in the collective memory makes this paper super effective. What's so powerful about it that it's not only iconic, so it's easy to understand, but it's also kind of like a very, I would say, concentrated capsule of history that is urban, that is political, that is social, that sits at so many kind of fault lines. So we have Arabs and Jews, mixed cities, and we have Ashkenazis, Mizrahis, and we have veterans versus immigrants, et cetera, And I think what's also so important here that we have, whereas we have so many studies on Wadi Salib, and you mentioned Ifat Weiss, and you mentioned Yara, who sits here as a postdoctoral fellow here at the faculty, and we have also studies on Musrara, of course, and the Black Panthers, but we don't have the juxtaposition, and this juxtaposition has potential to tell us many, many things, and I'll talk about it towards the end. What do we want to say when we juxtapose these two iconic neighborhoods? So I also think it's not only brilliant, it's also very natural, as Abigail mentioned, that not only that Abigail and Moshe each of these scholars comes with their own kind of urban expertise. Moshe with his Haifa-ness, and Abigail with her Jerusalemite-ness. But also the collaboration between the two of you that culminated in the book Oriental Neighbors that brought us up to 1948. And kind of the natural continuation, as Abigail mentioned, is okay, what happens after 1948 when a new actor enters into the scene? Now we have the Mizrahi Jews, okay? So it's not the Sephardi, classic Sephardi that we know from Aviram Tzoref and from all these studies before 48. We also have this new thing that we also have to remember. Israel invented them as a category. They're not a category as Mizrahi Jews, okay? The Tunisians were not Moroccans, the Moroccans were not Iraqis, etc., etc. So what do we do with this new actor in these mixed cities? So I think I will also say one of the things that also struck me here is that how this paper can answer a really a pressing scholarly gap that you identified, that on one hand, you have so much literature on the Mizrahis in Israel, right? You have so much sociology, anthropology, etc., etc. On the other hand, you have so much studies on the Israeli and the Palestinian society in Israel, but we do not have the juxtaposition of these two groups, so-called, let's say, relational history, if you will, of these two groups. And I think what you're doing is starting this kind of like dialogue of a relational history between the Mizrahi Jews and the Arabs after 1948. So here are some things that I'm going to say in a very kind of like selfish way that I would have liked, like that interested me, and I would have liked like to see how I'm extending you my selfishness to see if it works also with your kind of like ideas and notions and stuff. So first of all, I think that the idea of trapped, and I think that if you're using the idea of trapped, you really have to understand what it contributes, and if there are other kind of terms that can help you, that can serve you better. So basically, you're taking it from Dani Rabinovich in the context of the Palestinian minority, etc., and try to expand it in both ways, both spatially, and second, also on a different group, right? From instead of the Arabs, you're trying to do it on Mizrahi Jews. So it's a super interesting exercise. But what I was missing here, at least from my understanding, is one or two more sentences that explain what is this analytical power, what is the theoretical power of using trapped, and I would go a step further and ask, what does trap serve us that not the word enclave that you used a lot, or the word liminal that you didn't use at all, and I was wondering if it was intentional that you didn't use the word liminal, or the words that came up now that you talked, hybrid position, frontier, margins, etc. So why trapped? What does trapped use? What does trapped add to the conversation? I'm asking. I'm sure, like you thought about it, but I wasn't entirely sure. And because you quoted after that, you quoted Wendy Cullen, you quoted Orwa Niftachel, so Sassen, so you brought it into the kind of like critical geographical realm. So I will it also threw me to these more kind of like geographical realms, and there's a lot of writing about these stuff. And one term that struck me, I don't know if it's useful for you at all, but I'll just kind of put it out there. I'm sure you know about it, but I'll try to kind of share, walk you through my thoughts as I was reading the article. Is that, of course, you know that critical geography, there's a lot of writing about liminality and border, and what does it mean, border lines and border zones, not lines. So we're not talking about linear, we're talking about zones on both sides of the border. And one kind of famous term that struck me was the contact zones, the Mary-Louise Pratt term from 1992, that although it's from 1992, I'll try to explain why I think it's still very relevant. And for those who are not familiar with the term, so contact zones are basically, I'm quoting here Pratt's definition, social spaces where disparate cultures meet, clash, and grapple with each other, and often highly asymmetrical relations of domination and subordination, like colonialism, slavery, etc., etc. And they use it a lot for border areas, and especially most often for trading posts or border cities where the movement of people and commodities bring about contact. So even though it's from 1992, and we clearly kind of like see the echoes of that, she's a linguistic scholar, by the way. So even though we see kind of like, you know, the leftovers of the linguistic term, and we're already way after the linguistic term, it's a very useful concept. It's still very very much used. So just kind of like a very random survey shows me that, of course, the term is used now, of course, but the ecological, for the environmental term. So now people talking about more than human contact zone approach, et cetera, et cetera. So it's still very, very much, I think it's a very useful term. So this could be one option, because it sounds to me, and here's my second point, more like a liminal kind of area that instead of trap, which creates some kind of passive, kind of a passivity, kind of like predestined. I think that maybe, contact zone or liminality or anything else kind of alludes to agency. And what comes very clearly from your paper is the agency of these people. And I will talk about it in a moment. And I will just add before I say that one work in Israel that dealt with contact zones and you might find effective, I don't know if you're familiar with that, is Toby Fenster's microarchaeology, the address project, which actually Ronen sits here. Ronen contributed a piece to that project. So she uses depopulated Palestinian houses in Jaffa and Jerusalem as a contact zone. And so in case you don't, just check it out. I think it can be very, very useful to see if it works for you or not. Again, if it serves you, if it doesn't serve you, but kind of like to play with more of these geographical terms that come from the world of critical geography. And also I want to say that when you think about trapped versus other term, so you really have to think in this is how if it's a story of agency, of initiative, of makeshift, or do you want to tell a story of kind of, a sociological story of structural, institutional inequality, of what we call talich menuchshalut, okay, disempowerment, it's stuff like that. Well, like where does the emphasis? Of course, two of these elements can be together, but where's your emphasis? More kind of like, a story that looks at the mechanisms, it's top-down mechanism, or a story that tells it's kind of like from below, agency from below, initiative, etc. So is it a story of disempowerment, a story of weakening of Nachshalut? I'm sorry, I forgot the word in English. Or are these neighborhoods, and here's another point, a bridge, a contact zone? Because the agency and the bridge was very, very clear, at least to me. First of all, and I'll give you a few examples. So first of all, the idea of a bridge, right? I was struck by the this very little anecdote of David Deri's recollections, his friend's recollections, that whenever children crossed the border by mistake as part of their game, the parents interacted with the Jordanian soldiers by screaming in Moroccan Arabic. So this sounds to me like a classic kind of like contact zone, a classic bridge, right? Bridging between these two identities, between communities, creating these new pathways that go beyond the story of Mizrahi and Ashkenazi and actually point to agency, point to community, point to social formation, point to these hidden stories that we still do not know about. And in this regard, I'm thinking, for instance, of Nir Chasson's article 2 weeks ago. I'm sure you read it, right? In Haaretz, how he told the story about, which is a tragic story, but through this very tragic story, reveal a piece of history that we're completely off the radar. And I'll just tell all the audience, so in case you didn't read it. So basically, Nir Chasson describes this unfortunate tragic murder case in some kind of like a Moshav Olim, this desolate Moshav Olim on the border in Har Eitan, where he reveals new archival materials, arguably reveal that a Tunisian a network of immigrants needed to kill this Yemenite Jewish settler in order to enable their kind of a trade of networks with local Arabs. So we have here another, even though it's a very tragic story, we have here in the rural context, by the way, not in the urban context, we have here another story of this bridge, right, of these Mizrahis, Tunisai that collaborate and kind of like create this smuggler network with the Jordanians and with the local Arabs, etc., etc. So we get here a much more complex story than the Mizrachim were created by the Ashkenazim. We get here a story of agency, a story of social formation, a story of multiplicity. And I'm going beyond that. To me, what was the most striking, kind of like, I was absolutely astonished by that you presented with one sentence about the reverse inflammatories. I was absolutely speechless. So for those of you who haven't read the article, so Abigail and Moshe described that Arab Jews who said enough is enough. They just basically crossed the border to the Jordanian side and said, that's it, we want to live in the Jordanian side. You know, this is where we belong. This is where we want to go. So beyond the fact that, of course, it's brought us to the Cold War, kind of like, you know, Berlin, crossing the border between the Est and West, you know, and those who, you know, made their miserable choice of going to East Berlin, to the communist side. It's just a striking example of agency, of mobility, of contact zone, maybe, of bridge, maybe, but definitely a story that goes under the radar. And I'm not sure, and maybe I might be wrong, that trapped is the right term if this is where your focus goes. I'm not sure where your focus goes. By the way, I think it's a sensation. And I looked at your footnotes, and all your footnotes were primary resources. So nobody has written about it. So you kind of gathered it from the Val, another article of the Val, another article of the Val. I think it's really interesting. So I'm going in and I'm almost kind of closing. So this is what's my kind of like first bigger theme, to think about tract or other kind of geographical terms, and to think, what do you want to do with the data that you have? Where are you taking this article? Where are you taking the story of these two neighborhoods? Then the second thing that also is connected, that there was a moment in the end of the article that you said the translation of the notion of a tract identity and community in the urban space, blah, 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 serves to explain the outburst of the Mizrahi revolt in Haifa in 1959 and in Jerusalem in 1971. Okay, so if this is the kind of trajectory that you want to take the article, I'm not sure that all these soundscapes and all the little vignettes that we're talking about are those that serve. So I want to say that if you want to do that, I'm under the impression that you have to maybe develop a different strategy. You have to maybe take it to more kind of like a very close, detailed micro history of the neighborhoods. If you want to explain the reason of the outburst of these two specific neighborhoods, or it requires, you know, going over the micro history, the contingentio, the actors, the players, you know. I'm thinking about, for instance, one of the most, I would say, exquisite examples in this case is, of course, Gadi and Gadi's work on the Ma'abara in Kfar Saba. I'm sure you know of that, which is really kind of like a micro history that tells us it's an amazing example, unheard of how the Ma'abara revolted against the Ashkenazi Jews, who plotted against them because they wanted the real estate, and they actually created this false alarm that there are terror attacks from Kalkilia. They coordinated in order to make them flee and basically convince them to move into a shikun that they wanted them to move into so they can get their land. So this kind of like amazing story we can get through a very close micro history, right? So if you want to take this path of why the outburst, an explanatory kind of like paper, I would say this is one direction, and then think about the trap, if it serves you, if it doesn't serve you. But if you want to take, and here I'm kind of coming full circle with your first kind of intervention, that you said we need more history, more relational history of the Mizrahi immigrants and the Arab Palestinians. So if you want to take into that direction, so I think here you have like a really striking example, and you have tons of examples. We have the infiltrators, we have the soundscape, we have the multi-sensory experience, all the things. And we have and you have this very big array of anecdotes and of data that you bring in the article. And so that's like a direction that I would say, and in this way, you're not taking it into the question, the big question of why there's outbursts in these two neighborhoods, but you're taking it into these two neighborhoods as a segue to think about relational history post 1948, with using the new category of the Mizrahim, you know, the immigrants Mizrahim, And I'm almost finishing with two more thoughts. So first of all, the fact that you interviewed Abed, I think is mind-blowing, because I was only acquainted with the story of Abed. I think it's a very kind of Haifa story, Abed. Probably Moshe knows better. Like it's a very kind of like probably the best well-known secret in Haifa, Haifa scholars, the story of Abed. And I only was acquainted with it through my students this year who worked on Wadi Nisnaf and kind of got to him and interviewed him as well. But I think Abed is exactly the story. Abed is a Palestinian who fled and then was an infiltrator supposedly, and then kind of settled back and a painter, et cetera, and a communist and everything. So I think this kind of like microhistory is very important in terms of the maybe relational history you wanna maybe or not go into. And then another thing that I thought about that I was wondering about is the communists. So we know that Wadi Nisnaf was this big communist hub. We know that we have all these mixed, couples, usually Jewish woman and a Palestinian man. And I was wondering, so we know that in Musrara, the Black Panthers kind of echo this global leftist politics. But I was wondering, in terms of, if we go back to this global relational history, if there's any kind of interaction between the Musrara, the Wadi Salib protesters, and what was going on in Wadi Nisnaf. And I think that if you're connecting that, then you have another big thing to say about, and then it doesn't become like an anecdote. Oh, the underprivileged and the lower, how I would say, the marginal communities and the marginal, but you have here a really strong story of solidarity and how like collaboration between these two kind of, marginal communities created this boom of what happened in 1971. So I will stop here. I have many things. It was just such a pleasure. Thank you so much. And let me know whenever you want. I would love to, read and follow the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Shira. For our second response, I would like to invite Dr. Orwa Switat. Dr. Switat is an activist, urban planning scholar, and practitioner. His research focuses on state minorities relations in planning and the position of social and minority groups in planning theory and practice. Dr. Switat also served as a public representative and planning expert in Haifa's municipal committee for historical building preservation.
Okay, thank you, Edith, and everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. And actually, thank you for a very interesting paper and talk that raises very important questions about spatial wounds in the city that are meaningful for different minority groups. That sometimes they intersect and other times they clash. So wounds that are still open actually, and they shape the relations between the state and minorities in the urban context. But not only, your talk emphasizes how these spatial wounds also shape the relations between different minorities and even inside the minorities themselves. So for the Palestinian hegemonic discourse, the Mizrahi are the colonizers, right? But for the Mizrahi, the Ashkenazi state is racist, while the relations between Jews and Palestinians before 48, as Moshe also said, is an untold story. They lived together, they worked together, they were one. The heterogeneity of the city was an integral part of the city. Maybe because of that, the resistance of Palestinians to the Jewish immigration to the city burst only in the late 20s and 30s, while before they were considered as an integral part of the social fabric of a diverse city that attracted many groups from all over Palestine, the Levant, Europe, and etc. I think that this story threatens the hegemonic narrative of both the Palestinians and the Jews, because the both two narratives, and the two narratives, are based on the concept of ethnic tension and ethnic separation that is translated in the space itself. But I think that we need to complement this perspective from a planning lenses, and to ask ourselves how planning has transformed the status of minorities in the city, and to bring back actually the state into the arena. Okay, and to think about the state through its spatial practices, but also through its constitutional concepts of the rights of the different social and minority groups. As such, it's clear also from the talk and from the article that planning as a spatial practice in relation to minorities is a political constitutional concept of rights. Because obviously planning practice is more strongly led by political concepts of minority rights than planning approaches, due to its legal and constitutional foundations. And it becomes actually evident that planning approach to ethnic minorities, for example, in Wadi Salib and Musrara, has changed due to the evolution of the Israeli legal status and the constitutional concepts of their rights through different stages, like starting from the legal annihilation of their ownership, of the Palestinian ownership, through the absentee law and the land acquisition law that considered the Palestinians the owners of these houses, of these spaces, as absent. Therefore, the state could confiscate their properties and use it for development, settlement, and security under a military rule. These laws actually allowed the state to control more than 70,000 historical buildings in different cities, managed by Amidar, the governmental company. But by this legal legitimacy, planning erased actually in the 50s and the 60s more than 40% of the historical city in Haifa, for example, and demolished the old city and many parts of Wadi Salib while settling Mizrahi Jews in their houses. This has turned the lost space of the community into a space of thrive to return. But it's also a place where both memories and pains meet and intersect. So, and of course, during the 80s and 90s, planning covered up these open wounds by governmental buildings and governmental offices and courthouse and other office buildings. And by the way, the trapped neighborhood, I think it's a very interesting term. It has disconnected between Jews and Arabs, between Mizrahi and Palestinians, but also between Hadar and downtown, right? But also inside the Palestinian community itself, between Halisa and Wadi and Isnas. Yeah. So today, the Palestinian community in the historical part of the city is fragmented because of this trap that was created in Wadi Salib. In the 2000s, there's a twist in the plot in the different cities, by the way, also in Jerusalem, also in Haifa, also in Jaffa, Led, Ramle, Akka. New Israeli laws moved towards the privatization of state properties, which enhanced actually the sale of thousands of buildings, mainly in historical urban centers of mixed cities like Haifa, Ramle, Led, Jaffa. So out of 70,000 buildings, we have only today 4,800 buildings controlled by the state in the historical parts. In Wadi Salib, hundreds of housing units have been sold to few companies promoting different real estate projects. And I think also it was clear in May 2021, the clashes between Palestinians and Jews in Jaffa that has been sparked in Jaffa. The background of these clashes was the attempt of the governmental company Amidar to sell one of these properties to a far-right group that declared clearly its aim to Judaize Jaffa. So this shift shaped also the shift in the planning system through urban regeneration projects, turning the ruins of the Nakba into economic pearls that serves the interests of the private market through the distortion of the historical Palestinian neighborhood and the depoliticization, actually, of the urban development. But it's also made a co-optation of the struggle when the relations has shifted from a collective relations into a private matter between the company and the individual. So it's a privatization of the homeland for the Palestinians. Moreover, planning turned Wadi Salib into Salib Valley. So it's the name of the project, and I'm not joking, by the way. The American style and the Hollywood name, Salib Valley, actually turns the indigenous space into a universal mode which enables the reframing of the indigeneity itself. This approach also considered the Palestinian urban modern historical architecture as a village, not unmodern, a mandatory Ottoman architecture, but never urban and never modern and never Palestinian. So I think the neoliberal concepts of planning in this context enhance projects for small apartments, boutique prestigious condos, without any public, social, cultural, community infrastructure, which actually dismantles any possibility for restoration, for correction, for healing, for building a community. So the trapped neighborhood is being changed to be a new spatial connect, actually, between the different surrounding neighborhoods, a connect that is neoliberal. Real estate companies are freeing the trap, are liberating the trap, but reframing the relations through depolitization and cooptation. It's a new way to reframe the relations in the city between the different groups and among the groups through a colorblind relations, which structures the historical inequality in the city. However, also the Mizrahi and the Palestinian community struggle today to reclaim their memories and their position in the changing and shifting neighborhoods, such as Wadi Salib. While the Mizrahi still have shops there in the market, and they organize several cultural festivals to memorize their pain. At the same time, Palestinians struggle and thrive to actualize their actual return to the neighborhood through different spatial practices, such from protest to alternative planning and to influence the planning processes that happens today. To conclude, I think that we cannot think about planning today without thinking about the concepts of justice and social difference. And how can we recognize the pains and the positions of the different minorities, but also how can we, through planning, create a restorative justice, and even to promote planning against nationalism in that terms. Therefore, to think about planning as a constitutional concept of rights has the ability to heal the wounds in a shared space, wounds that are context, and many times they are in contestation and in negation, through connecting the pains of different groups that can enable planning to protect the minorities, actually, and to recreate a new urban identities through a shared healing and solidarity in front of the rising tide of state racism and ethno-racial nationalism. Thank you again for the opportunity, and of course, I love to continue the discussion.
Thank you very much, Orwa. We have like 10 minutes, so we want to open the discussion, and if any of you want to comment, we will be happy to hear.
I'd like to make a small comment, which is kind of like a question also. Thank you so much for the presentation and for the really enlightening comments from both of you. I have a very basic question which relates to the identity of Wadi Salib, the physical identity of Wadi Salib as a neighborhood. And I think I would really like to ask where Wadi Salib is, because I have a feeling just from looking at old maps that the area we call Wadi Salib is not Wadi Salib as it was when Wadi Salib still existed. And from this, I think it's kind of a very basic, you know, the relationship between place and name is kind of a very basic thing when we talk about neighborhoods which have not only lost their original communities, but also kind of lost their identity or their perceived existence in space. So I think this would be, especially since you're using this term trapped neighborhoods, I'm kind of wondering about the physical aspect of this trapped between what and where this place is. And I think it would be really great if you kind of go into there and kind of have a look at what's where it was or where it is, Wadi Salib. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for great talks and great comments. I want to continue what Ruthie says and use our skills to be very very hands-on or sheet-on. I wonder what is the difference. Musrara, you're actually not talking about a real context, I mean, in terms of everyday living, because you're talking about the trap is by Haredi Jews, it's by the business district, then central business district, and by the border. So there's no direct contact with the Ashkenazi communities that you're talking about. So it's a very different trap. I mean, it's basically more isolated from the life of Western kind of European Ashkenazi Jews, and it's designated as a frontier neighborhood, and it's really fortified as a frontier neighborhood. And in Wadi Salib, we have a very different situation where the topography, and it's in a nutshell the logic of Haifa, that the upper you go, the better off you are. And the idea is that basically then, and you mentioned it, the cinemas and the way that people, that the residents of Wadi Salib are going to the cinemas, that their cinemas are so much part of the culture of Adar Carmel. And the idea that you don't talk about it, but the way they perceive their Alsim as, kind of almost dangerous people for the better of population. So it's a very direct, and the idea, I think it's very symptomatic that nobody puts a direct border over there because it's crossed over all the time. And because the Palestinians well-to-do housing are already part, it's not clear, they're not part of Adar. So the ethnic line was not clear also. So the idea of this kind of a very direct physical contact and isolation, what do you make out of it? And just, I was surprised that you said that in 59, only a third of the population is North African. And we are and this is after many of the Romanians succeeded to live and so on. So what really happened there?
You want maybe to answer, Abigail, Moshe, or anyone in the Zoom, any word want to comment more?
Yeah, so I think, Abigail, we can. So I just want to say first that me, Abigail, and I are collaborating with. It's of course we started also with some statement about collaboration, about trying to overcome the gaps and the separation between Middle Eastern studies and Jewish studies, and between Israel studies and Palestinian studies. And the idea was also to cooperate. This is what we did in our former project, and now trying to overcome this separation. And it's also very important, and this is regarding the comments that we just heard about the collaboration between the institutes that are gathering here, the Technion and the university. And I think this is kind of it's very important because there are all kinds of point of view and that are contribute to research, and the collaboration with Shira, already at the University of Haifa, and I'm very happy about this opportunity of collaborating and to over the gap between architecture, history, and it was very strong emphasis in the comments that we had. So, and this is one thing. Now, about the comments of Shira, they're excellent. We learn a lot from them. And here, it's true because we were trying to look about relational, about the paradigm of relational, about Arab-Jewish relation from the point of view of Sephardi and Mizrahi Jew, and here we use microhistory. Yeah, we choose 2 case studies and we try to learn from them about the experience of immigrants, Jewish immigrants from Arab countries, and the meeting with the Palestinians that remain in the state of Israel. And here we continue our research from in Oriental neighbors. Now, it's not only Musrara and Wadi Salib, it's also, of course, Ajami. And here we can see the differences between Ajami is a mixed neighborhood, and it's very interesting to compare it. And Shira mentioned the Ma'abarot, the transit camp. Now, I'm also writing now about Haifa and about the transit camps in Haifa. And the case study of Tira, it's a story that's fascinating, because here we have Palestinian refugees that returned to Tira and lived in the transit camp in Ma'abarat Tira with the Iraqi Jews. And it's very interesting, the cases that we can find in Musrara, Wadi Salib, and you mentioned Kfar Saba and the transit camps, and this kind of concept that we try here also to focus in our research. So, and it's true that we are looking less about the ethnic protest and the Mizrahi protest and more, I think, about the relation and the way that borders affecting relation, immigration affecting relation, institution, and so on. And here also we are trying to focus also about crossing the borders and the infiltration. That it's a fascinating story about Musrara and the borderline in Jerusalem. But we have also stories of Palestinian Arabs and Jews that are crossing the border, you know, to Lebanon, Samir Nakash and others. So it's also very interesting subject that we try to discuss in our paper. Now, about the terms, the comments of Shira are very important, and we are aware to this terminology. We use the term trapped because it's also about identities. It's not only about geography. And here we are also focusing on the Arab-Jewish identity and the Arab Jew, and the meaning of this Arab-Jewish culture and history and hybrid identity. And here the trapped, it's also about the history, the geographic identities, and this is why we use it. And the other terms that Shira mentioned are also relevant, of course, but I think the trapped here, it's very strong, and we have still a discussion about it, and here the comments already contribute to our discussion. Now, about our comments about painful past, and here I can say, from my experience here at Dartmouth, that this subject is very emphasized here, about painful past and transitional justice, about the way that land acknowledgement, and about we had here 2 weeks ago a lecture about Jewish past in Morocco and the meaning of justice and painful justice. And this is a discourse and dialogue that is it's very important, and I'm very connected to what you say about the meaning of Haifa here and the history of Haifa. And Abigail and I are very aware to all the subject of the property and the planning that, and here we can see in 48 there was one process of destruction in the Shikmona project, and then we have in the 60s and 70s, and it's very interesting to discuss it. And also what you say about the differences between Chalisa and Wadi Nisnas, and also we can speak about Chof Shemen, what was the Ard El Rimal. It's very interesting, an important subject that we are aware to them. Now, about Wadi Salib as a territory, it's true, there's a lot of misunderstanding, because part of Wadi Salib, it's what was called Ard El Yahud. All the street between Wadi Salib and Ard El Yahud, today it's Kibbutz Galuyot Street, it used to be Iraq Street. Now, the cinema that was Al Nasser cinema, and then was changed to Adar, they were part of Ard El Yahud, not Wadi Salib, Ard El Yahud. And also you can see it in the book of I forgot her name, Endel, about the Rehov HaMadregot, that there's a mix that some associate it with Wadi Salib, but they are part of Ard El Yahud. And we can see that all this area was a mixed area, and the mixing is continued also after 48. Also about Arabs that live in these streets, Kibbutz Galuyot, Natzeret, Iraq, and this is very interesting area. It was called also Retzuat Shikmona. Now, about the intercommunal relations, we are discussing it in details, and I think this is a very important aspect that we're trying to emphasize. Less about the Ashkenazi Mizrahi. It's true, we can find, we have a lot of data about the children that are going to Rehavia and the children that are arriving to Adar Carmel, the children that are looking the daily life of children that are crossing the borders. Also, it's also about women, by the way, in 59 in Wadi Salib, the role of women and gender, it's also very important. And we are aware to it, and this is to what Alona comments about the intercommunal and the experience, and we are aware to this and trying, and we see how we're going to develop it in our research.
Thank you so much, everyone. I think we will take 10 minutes break, so don't go anywhere.
Maybe Abigail wants
Abigail, do you want to comment more before we go on a break?
Just very briefly, I'm not sure how much time do I have, but first of all, thank you so much, Shira. It's such a delight to get your input about the theory here and the concepts. You know that I was really, really curious to hear your thoughts about it, and I do have to think about your suggestion regarding contact zones, and especially I didn't think about when you said that trapped seems to be a little bit that it alludes to passivity. I was struck by this, and I have to think about it actually some more, whether this is the case, because of course we're not at all talking about passivity. We are talking about agency of our actors here in both neighborhoods. So if it gives the sense of passivity, we really need to kind of think about it and think it through. But Moshe and I, as Moshe said, are struggling and are thinking all the time about this term trap and whether or not it works well for our argument or not. So this is one thing. The other thing that I really appreciate, and again, going back to what Moshe started with, is not only the connection between the Technion and the University of Haifa, for example, but also, of course, the disciplinary connection between historians and urban planners, which I think is so much missing in terms of theoretization, in terms of terms, in terms of dialogue between the two disciplines. Moshe and I are both historians, and you guys have a different set of concept and conceptual world that you're working with. So I really, really appreciate this and really hope to continue this dialogue. And Orwa, thank you so much for what you suggested. And I totally agree that we need to think about planning and of course not only planning today, which you obviously mentioned and discussed, but really about the history of planning, obviously, and about the meaning of planning. And I really, really liked what you said about how the idea of a place where memories and pain meet. I think this is a really powerful idea that we have to think how exactly does it play out in our stories, especially I think in Wadi Salib, when you think about the destruction and the demolition and the double demolitions, like the two waves of demolition that this neighborhood has gone through. And one of the striking things I think that also come out in Yifat Weiss work on Wadi Salib is how the pain doesn't really meet, right? I mean, the demolitions are not really connected to each other, I think, in the perception of the residents of the neighborhood. There is no connection that is made by the early stage of demolition, the first stage of demolition back in 48, and the second stage of demolition in the 70s, following the Wadi Salib, the rethinking about the neighborhood and the planning, etc. So I really appreciate, I think this is really, really powerful. And just really, really briefly going back to Alona, and it's nice to see you again, Alona, after all these years. We last met in Van Leer, I think, years ago. So the issue of the border and the direct and indirectness. So yes, you're right. I mean, in the western border of Musrara is not with Rehavia, obviously, but the imagined border of Musrara is with Rehavia. And the kids from Musrara, as Moshe mentioned, when they are walking in Rehavia, they are, they're being kicked out of this neighborhood basically, and they're being, they are alarming. They seem to be strangers. People say that these are from, the other neighborhoods. They are not connected to Rehavia, etc. So it's not only physical. This is one of the things that we're talking about, is also the imagined border and the uncrossable border between the lives, the experiences of the kids from Musrara, for example, or the adults from Musrara, or the adolescents from Musrara, and Rehavia, and the residents of Rehavia. Thank you.
Just one very quick comment about what you just said. It's clear that they're both imagined, but the idea of putting the actual geography, then the physical environment there, it's interesting about the possibilities and the agency, because it's clear that when you go to Rehavia, you're completely, you're like infiltrator. It's like crossing a border in a full sense, and you're absolutely a stranger. But when the physical border is more immediate, then the opportunity of appropriation exists. The idea of what you can conquer as a place where you actually are and cannot be kicked out of. And the cinema can be one of these places that are already appropriated. You cannot appropriate anything as a Musrara kid in Rehavia. You can part of downtown, and it happened. So I think there are opportunities beyond the imagination that the actual geography provides.
Thank you. We will take 10 minutes and we will be back in 6 minutes. מדהים, אותם 3 שעות של הקלטה.
קודם כל, כן, אני רוצה דבר שאני רוצה לדעת סטודנטיות, מכיוון שהגישו לי, לא, אבל את יודעת, לא יודעת אם מעבירים.
אני לא מאמינה אני אגיד לך מה הם עשו. העבודה עצמה, הם כיתה כאילו אין דברים כאלה, לא אין לי דברים כאלה, וזה פשוט לנו, היה להם כאילו תרגיל היסטורי, הם איתו את עבד עבדי, הם קבעו איתו רעיון, הם ישבו איתו 3 שעות, הקליטו את הרעיון, ובסוף התוצר לא היה כל כך עבודה, היה רק איזה עמוד וחצי, התוצר של העבודה, הטקסט, אבל מה שהם עשו שם, כי הם חושבים מרחבית, לא כמוני, הם פשוט לקחו יריית ענק, איזה A0, אין מקום, אני אמרתי, אתם משוגעים, חילקו לו לתחנות, כאילו באו ואמרו לו, ילדות עד הנכבה, נכבה, עשו לו עמודות, פעילות, והוא ציית, והוא ציית להם, פעילות במאקי, ניסויים, והוא פשוט ציית, והוא מילא להם את הרובריקות.
אני רוצה לראות את זה.
אז אנחנו צילמנו את הכל ותיעדנו, אמרתי להם, ניסיתי לעניין ערבים בחיפה, כאילו כדי להכניס את זה לאיזשהו מרכז של oral history, ולא מצאנו כאילו מישהו שיוכל לקחת את זה, אמרתי להם, תעלו את זה לדרייב, אנחנו נמצא מה לעשות בזה, אמרתי להם, תעלו את זה, והם העלו לי את זה בסמסטר, העלו לי את זה לדרייב, ואני עכשיו אומרת, את הסטודנטים האלה קוראים שרה אהרון ושון פוגל, והם כאילו, אין סיכוי,
לא היה שלי, אוקיי.
זה שנה
אין סיכוי
שאצלי באופן בלתי מוסבר פתאום צף לו עבדתי לתוך עבודה בצורה שכאילו בכלל לא הבנתי למה אני צורה.
אני לא יודעת, זה שנה.
אלון, אתם שומעים אותי רגע?
גם נדבר עליו.
איזה
איתן
מן, אוקיי. אני לא יודעת, לי זה פשוט מאוד מוסבר. איפה שאני ראיתי את זה, אבל שם זה שונה.
מה בגלל?
אני חייבת להביא ולהחזיר ילדים, אני אמשיך להקשיב לכם באוטו. אז רק רציתי להתנצל שאני לא ממש חלק מהדיון עכשיו, מהחלק השני. המון תודה. המון תודה.
תודה אביגיל.
כן, אביגיל, תודה רבה.
רגע, תשלחי לי את זה?
כן, עכשיו אני אשמע.
מעולה, אני רוצה ממש
את רואה, איך בצד, אני הכרחתי אותם כאילו לסרוק ולהעלות את זה.
כן, זה נשמע מרתק.
אבל אלונה, את חושבת שהמרכז מורשת תקלוט את זה? אין לי בעיה. אנחנו נעשה את זה במרכז מורשת. אני כאילו אמרתי, זה היסטוריה של הפלסטינים, אני כאילו אומרת,
לא, זה אחת המטרות שלנו, היא מאוד קשה.
אבל יש כזאת צלע שוקקת של ערבים בחיפה, בטוח יש להם מקום שהם כאילו רוצים את הדברים האלה, לא?
אולי נתחיל לבנות את זה כאן.
לא,
אנחנו נתחיל שירות התחילה לעשות בזה.
כן, אמרתי להם לעשות, אבל זה יתמסמס, אפשר לעשות.
Meaning I will talk on the early period of Baerwald before World War I. This is what Alona asked me to do. And so I'm afraid my commenters, they will have a bit of a difficult time because the article that I sent to them is dealing with other aspects of Baerwald's work and the context in which Baerwald was educated and so on. But we will see how it works out. And yeah, talking about Baerwald, you know, I published something like 4 articles on Baerwald during the last, I have to say, 25 years. And because how did I came to the topic of Baerwald when I started working at the Technion in the department or in the archive, which is now headed by Alona and by you, Yael. So when I came there, I suddenly saw lots of files and they were filled up with beautiful plans and drawings, and I opened them and they were by Baerwald and nobody ever had done anything with that. So I started very basic work on Baerwald, cataloging his work. And from this stemmed my interest in Baerwald, but also my research and a bit of analysis. What I actually will present today is something a bit new to me because I'm really not specialist on the Ottoman period in Palestine. My research is usually dealt with Palestine under British mandate. And you heard I did a lot on Mendelssohn and so on, but I will try, and I'm very happy I learned that my commenters, they are more specialized in modern Turkey. So I'm very looking to their comments and to their ideas how I can contextualize my Baerwald researches. So I start, and I hope I will get this right. Wait.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And I hope sometimes my the program freezes, but I hope this will not happen too often. Okay, let's start. And we start the story in Berlin in 1909. Late in autumn that year, Prussian government architect Alexander Baerwald received an invitation to the office of the liberal politician and publicist Paul Nathan. Completely surprising for him, he was offered the contract for the construction of a major project in Haifa, a Jewish institute for technical education, in short, at that time called Technikum, later known, of course, as you know, in its Hebraized naming as the Technion. And I will concentrate in my short paper on the Technion because otherwise I will get lost with all the other projects he did. Okay, without a moment's hesitation, Baerwald immediately agreed. He said, it's recorded somehow, he said, yes, I will build it. I will go there and build the Technikum. The reason for his quick decision was the emigration of his very good friend Elias Auerbach a month earlier to settle as the first Jewish practicing physician on the Carmel slope. Paul Nathan acted as chairman of the Berlin-based Hilfsverein der deutschen Juden, in English, Aid Association of German Jews, and in Hebrew known shortly as Ezra, which also financed Auerbach's presence in Haifa. Baerwald was not the first architect approached by the Association for the Technikum project. Beforehand, a request had gone to Theodor Herzl's friend Oskar Marmorek in Vienna, apparently a few weeks before his suicide. After that, the search for suitable architects continued in Berlin. 2 German Jewish architects were contacted. However, neither Georg Rathenau nor Louis Lachmann, both architects with considerable reputation, could imagine to stay in faraway Haifa for a longer period, a condition which was attached to the commission. The assignment of the Technikum with an attached Realgymnasium, the Real School, opened up further commissions for Baerwald in the region. The spectrum of his work for the Yishuv was wide, from simple housing and stable buildings for newly founded collective settlements to domiciles for private individuals to public building commissions, including hospitals, museums, synagogues, town halls, theaters, including the planning of entire settlements and districts. Numerous projects, almost 80 all in all, such as this very early design for a country house in Haifa for his friend Elias Auerbach. And on most of these commissions in his early Haifa period, he worked from his Berlin drawing board. And like this design, this project, many of his designs were not executed. The Technion in Haifa was not only Baerwald's largest project in his entire oeuvre, but also the largest construction venture for the Hilfsverein in its 37-year existence. It had been founded in 1901 by a handful of prominent, influential Berlin Jews and had already 3,000 members in the following year. With 27,000 members in 1913, it was one of the 4 largest welfare organizations in Germany. It saw itself neither as an Orthodox religious institution nor as a Zionist instrument, but as a purely philanthropic Jewish association. On its agenda were the problems of Jews outside the German borders, mainly in Eastern Europe, and until World War I in the Ottoman Empire. Here, the focus was on Palestine and primarily on the establishment and funding of an extensive school program. It comprised 28 institutions with over 3,000 pupils. 14 of the schools were in Jerusalem alone. The growing glory was to be the Technion in Haifa. In addition to Paul Nathan, the cotton magnate James Simon, also based in the German capital, played an important role. He was one of the most prominent members of the Hilfsverein and acted as its president for many years. His commitment, however, was not limited to Jewish welfare alone. On Simon's agenda was the enhancement of Berlin's cultural landscape, which he wanted to see as equal to that of London and Paris. His immense gifts to the city, including the famous bust of Nefertiti, as well as his Renaissance and medieval collections, laid the foundation for the Egyptian Museum and the Bode Museum. The long-forgotten patron has only recently experienced a renaissance of commemoration, which finds its long overdue appreciating by naming the new gallery designed by David Chipperfield on Berlin's Museum Island after him. Enormous philanthropic engagements, which went, by the way, beyond the cultural sphere and included support of social projects in Berlin, such as the establishment of public baths and children's recreation homes, can only be understood through his self-image as a patriotic Russian of Jewish faith. His vita appears as a single demonstration of loyalty to the German Empire. This attitude and his occasional meetings with Wilhelm II earned Simon the quite disparaging designation Kaiserjude, the Jew of the Kaiser, coined by Chaim Weizmann. James Simon, as well as Paul Nathan, were convinced that philanthropic engagement would help or would best help against growing anti-Semitism in Germany. Like the similarly structured organizations of the Alliance Israélite Universelle in France, the Anglo-Jewish Association in England, and the Israelitische Allianz zu Wien, the Hilfsverein also saw itself committed to the foreign policy of its home country. Its foundation ran parallel to the expansion of Germany's policy towards Turkey, which had been pursued with particular vigor since Wilhelm II's accession to the throne in 1888. The Kaiser's agenda included not only a military alliance but also the expansion of Germany's economic relations and political influence in the Ottoman Empire. Among the most important investments were the construction of the Baghdad Railway and the Anatolian Railway. In 1898, the year of the emperor's visit to the Holy Land, with additional stops in Constantinople and Damascus, where he declared himself patron of all Muslims after laying a wreath at Saladin's tomb, the still existing German Orient Society was founded under the emperor's protectorate. One of the founding fathers and most important patron and Mäzen of the Orient Society was James Simon. Great importance was attached to cultural relations with the High Port. Throughout the Ottoman Empire, from Constantinople to Ankara, Beirut, and Baghdad, an empire-wide network of German schools was established with the aim of imparting Germanness through educational transfer. In subtext, this meant non-military colonization through the concrete. Numerous personalities, such as the publicist and liberal politician Friedrich Naumann and the journalist and political scientist Ernst Jeck, both involved actively in the German Werkbund, supported the modernization of Turkey and promoted the young Turkish revolution. The crowning...
מה המצב? איך היה? אצלכם.
Okay, this doesn't concern me, no? Okay, the crowning and at the same time, the last flowering of their commitment was the founding of the German-Turkish Society at the beginning of 1914. The following year, during the First World War, the society announced a competition for a house of friendship in Constantinople, to which 12 German architects, including Bruno Taut, August Endel, Theodor Fischer, Martin Elsässer, and Hans Pölzig, all of them very well-known and avant-garde, were invited. The second side of the same coin was the gnawing silence of German politicians, but also of cultural figures such as Jeck and Naumann on the simultaneously taking place of the Armenian genocide. The school projects run by the Hilfsverein in the Ottoman Empire seamlessly joined the German educational program. Explicit reference was made in the association's memoranda, stating that the technical educational institution in Haifa, which was to be open to students of all religions, would serve to promote the German language, German culture, and German trade in the Ottoman Empire. In return, the German government guaranteed patronage of the project. During his travels in 1907 and 1908 to check out potential locations for the Technikum, Paul Nathan was supported by letters of recommendation from the German Foreign Office to the consular missions in the country. Jerusalem and Haifa were shortlisted. Nathan quickly decided on Haifa, which at the time had a population of around 25,000. Inhabitants. The reason for his choice was not least because of the increased German presence due to the Templars. Although they were hardly significant in terms of numbers, with barely 500 souls, their well-organized craft and transport businesses were of great influence on the city's development. Their activities ensured that Haifa occupied a place in the mental map of the Foreign Office in Berlin. Since 1879, there had been a German vice consulate in Haifa, which at the time of the Technicum's planning and construction was headed by Julius Leutfeld Hardegg. Another asset for Haifa was the Turkish railway line to Derat in Syria, which was completed in 1905, connecting the city to the network of the Hejaz Railway and thus directly to Damascus and Beirut. In addition, work was done on the expansion of the port, although it was not finished as a deep water port until the 1930s under the British Mandate power. All in all, Haifa promised a future as an important industrial and trading base in the Middle East, which Theodor Herzl had already predicted. Relatively soon, the Hilfsverein managed to raise the necessary funds for the purchase of the spectacular 5-hectare plot on the slope of the Mount Carmel from private donors in Germany and abroad. At the forefront were the Moscow-based Vysotsky family and the New York banker Jacob Schiff. The building plot was registered to James Simon in Berlin. His house at Tiergartenstraße 15a subsequently became the address of any meetings concerning the Technicum and its planning. Although the Technical High School Berlin-Charlottenburg was repeatedly referenced, the initial idea for Haifa was not to educate engineers with degrees or even doctorates, but rather to provide in-depth training for technicians and master craftsmen and builders. The disciplines of mechanical engineering and civil engineering were determined to be meaningful for the Haifa location. Based on the German model, the corresponding curriculum was divided into 3 stages. A 9-year secondary school, which is the training at the Reali school, followed by an apprenticeship in workshops, 2 or 3 years, which was to be followed by more theoretical studies in the lecture halls and seminar rooms of the Technion, again 2 or 3 years. The acquired building site offered enough space for a campus with all 3 facilities, secondary or Reali school, workshops, and technical college. In addition to Alexander Baerwald, 2 top-class scientists from the Technical High School Berlin were involved in the decision-making processes about the building and pedagogical structure from the very beginning. Wilhelm Franz and Georg Schlesinger. The former was a specialist in the field of civil engineering with a focus on industrial construction. The latter, Georg Schlesinger, was the first scholar in Germany to represent the discipline of management science. He published widely on rationalization and efficiency enhancement of industrial production processes, almost simultaneously as Frederick Taylor's series on scientific management and Henry Ford's industrial mass production. With these 2 advisors, the intended orientation of the Jewish Institute for Technical Education in Haifa leaves no room for doubt. The agenda was not the development and expansion of regional craft traditions, but a know-how transfer aimed at the industrialization of the Middle East and thus the recruitment of new sales markets for the highly developed German industry in the Eastern Mediterranean region. The workshops of the Technikum were equipped with the latest products of German mechanical engineering. The list of companies reads like a trade directory of the most important German firms. And I've just put them all here down. I will not read them, but among them is Borsig and the AEG and so on, the Siemens, Schuckert works and so on, really the top of the top. For Alexander Baerwald to be awarded the contract of the Technion building, the fact that he was assimilated Jewish, an architect working for the Prussian state may have been essential. In any case, it was helpful. When Baerwald took on the planning of the Jewish Institute for Technical Education in Haifa, he had the backing of his German employer. The Prussian Ministry of Construction gave him leave, or as some called it, it borrowed him for 2 to 3 months every year so that he could first make the necessary preparations on site and later inspect the process of the construction work. For the interim periods, he was initially represented by the local Odessa-born architect Josef Barsky and later by the building engineer Gedalia Bilbushevitz, who, by the way, is also a student from the Technical High School Berlin. Baerwald used his long stays in the country to familiarize himself with regional building traditions. He did this with the proverbial Prussian thoroughness, and beyond Haifa, he made excursions to Jerusalem, Tiberias, Akko, and Jaffa, and later to Cairo and Damascus to study the major works of Islamic architecture and Arab domestic culture. Back in Berlin, he acquired numerous standard works on Oriental architecture, and you see here one example with his ex libris. Bear, it's the beer, and Wald is the forest. So this was his ex libris, and this became, his collection of books became the basis for the Technion library, and they should be still there. I mean, his books there. The development of his design reflects his ever deepening insight into the formal language of local building traditions. And the first one is 1910, the upper design, the middle one is half a year later, and the last one is the one that was executed. Already a few months after his first stay, he published the results of his research in the Palestine issue of the magazine Die Welt. Starting with central problems of water supply and the mosquito plague as important parameters in the selection of building sites, Baerwald presented his newly acquired knowledge of regional masonry and construction methods, the type and procurement of building materials, the multifunctional use of flat roofs, the influence of the climate on floor plan design, and even methods of interior ventilation. His well-founded survey bears witness not only to the extensive knowledge acquired in a relatively short time, but also to his deep respect for the local culture and his enthusiasm for traditional Arab architecture. I quote from this 1910 article, "All these simple architectural devices give the Syrian cities," Haifa belonged to the province of Syria at that time, "give the Syrian cities their uniform oriental splendor, which in the mind of the beholder forms inseparably with the peculiarly beautiful landscape and with the vegetation of the country, the palm tree, the olive tree, the cactus, into a unified concept and a harmonious painting." He felt that European influences in the Orient were not only painfully distorting, but equally unwise actions on the part of the conquerors. And I quote again, "Unfortunately, it is only in the very rarest of cases that the newer buildings in the country show an effort to adapt to the character of the local architecture. Especially if one wants to conquer a country culturally, one should not suppress the artistic results of the existing culture in the country, but grasp them with the finest artistic instinct and lead them to further development by utilizing means given by the progress of modern technology." Here, Baerwald shows himself deeply rooted in the historicism of the late 19th century, high caliber engineering in a historical or vernacular guise. His portrayal of local culture has the colonialist air typical of the time. The paternalistic attitude or the knowledge of domination, how Zeit would coin it, includes a genuine appreciation and respect for local building traditions. Improvement, however, can only be achieved by means of Western know-how. For Baerwald, it was a matter of, I quote him again, "adopting the working methods proven in the Orient and only applying European building materials, construction methods, and facilities in those points where the Orient fails," quote end. In the construction of the Technicum, for example, this meant that, quote, "on walls and pillars still built in the biblical manner, a modern stone iron ceiling was laid," quote end. Baerwald was essentially concerned with the presentation of the authentic Palestinian place and landscape, as well as the avoidance of its European overforming. To achieve this, he was prepared to create hybrids that fall apart between form and content. Hermann Muthesius, a highly esteemed colleague of Baerwald's in Berlin, summed up the dilemma in one sentence, and I quote him, It is the curse of every derivative style that it sees and admires only the form in the model, whereas in all genuine art, this is only an expression of their inner essence. During the First World War, in which Baerwald served as a high-ranking officer in the German Navy, Baerwald subtextualized the interaction of Oriental architecture and German technical achievements with the German-Turkish alliance. He described the Technikum as an institution, and I quote him again, which under the protection of German government is the first and so far the only technical school in Turkey called upon to train those technical forces that Turkey urgently needs for its great task, quote end. With patriotic impetus, Baerwald signed his article published in 1916 in the official newspaper of the Prussian Ministry of Public Works with Königlicher Regierungsbaumeister zurzeit im Felde, Royal Government Architect currently in military, in German government, Royal Government Architect, of course. The history of the Technikum as an important teaching institution in Ottoman Palestine ended a short time later. At the close of the First World War, the new chapter of the Hebrewised Technion under Zionist governance in British Mandate Palestine began. The question of the language of instruction, German or Hebrew, had irreconcilably divided the Hilfsverein and the Zionist organization. The planned opening of the technical school and the start of classes before the war had to be postponed, not because of the war, but because of this question of language and the conflict which went down in the history of the Technion as the war of languages was the casus belli in which was based on multifunctional causes. Ultimately, it was the entanglement of the Hilfsverein with the German Foreign Ministry. The Technion, the Technikum, was perceived as a branch of Prussia on Mount Carmel, a gift from Paul Nathan and James Simon to the German Kaiser. The dispute once again revealed the deep division within German Jewry. The Zionist claim to a Hebraized Technion threatened to question the loyalty of assimilated German Jews to Germany and its cultural policy. Alexander Baerwald, who accepted the chair of architecture at the Technion in 1925, not only taught in his mother tongue, German, like many immigrant professors after him, but still published his projects in the country. Still in 1928, in the newsletter of the Prussian Ministry of Public Works, under the headline, German Buildings in Palestine, a statement that raises questions, perhaps to be understood as a declaration of loyalty to his former clients. The Hilfsverein der Deutschen Juden, however, was no longer active in Palestine under British mandate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ita. Can you stop share? Oh, thank you. So for the first response, I invite Dr. Tulay Atak. Tulay Atak is an associate professor of the School of Architecture at Pratt Institute. She is an architect and architectural historian whose work explores questions of modern urbanism in the global context. Tulay?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Heinze-Greenberg. This was I mean, I have learned a lot throughout this.
Can you speak louder, Tulay? We don't hear you.
Actually, is this maybe better? Is this better? Is this better?
Yes. Can you
Yes?
hear us?
I can hear you. Okay, so I thank you. And thank you also, Edith, for inviting me. And thank you, Alona, also for suggesting, suggesting that I think a little more about what's called the first national style in Turkish architecture and how it relates. I really like thinking through this. I discovered a lot of things I did not know. So it's been a fantastic journey of discovery. And what I want to, something that, as I read your abstract, something that kind of stuck in my mind, kind of like my mind, I started turning around in my mind, was a phrase where you said, and you said it now in a different way as well, the building or Baerwald's work or building specifically is Western technology under Eastern or Oriental or Ottoman garb. So this I thought a lot about this, like, and some of the material is familiar, like in German technology, German industry, especially the related to railroads, establishment of this kind of network, in the Ottoman Empire. So that's kind of familiar history. But there is another aspect that I would like to think about, a parallel history of some sort, this kind of the guard history of the guard, basically. And that makes me think of like, and I would like to start with a book. There's a book called Usul-i Mimari Osmaniye, which was published in 1873 for the Vienna International Exposition. The Ottoman government supported this, basically. It was commissioned by the Ottoman government as part of its entry to this exposition. It was published in French and German and in Ottoman Turkish, and it was the first comprehensive study on the history and the theory of Ottoman architecture. So I'm thinking of that Ivan-style entrance to the building like that. It reminds me of some later buildings in Ankara, for instance, the Ethnography Museum. But a lot of that formal articulation, at least partially, relies on this kind of theory that was developing. So the people who were writing it was a collaboration. This was a collective group of authors, artists, architects in Istanbul, including French, Italian Levantines, Ottoman Armenians who were the architects. It is usually quoted as Victor Marie de Loret et al., but et al. Was a very big group. And the authors of this book were straddling, on one hand, they were very well informed about Western art history. On the other hand, they were also well informed about the exoticism and the difference that this art history attributes to Ottoman architecture. And they were also in a context which was self-orientalizing. So they emphasized decoration, and what they aim to show throughout the book is that there is history, it's rigorous, there is tectonics, there is form, and there's a possibility for the future, and this architecture can evolve. And after this, the School of Industry Engineering was established. There were several schools, actually, smaller ones and big ones. They were around 1890s. And in a strange way, like, there's a parallel, for instance, to Austria, in a way, like the school, like the kind of arts crafts in facing industry, and schools and theories being established in order to kind of straddle that. Now, one of the students in the school was an architect named Mimar Architect Kemalettin Bey, and he was the student of another German professor there who was active in Istanbul, August Jasmund, who designed the prison, the famous prison in Istanbul, who also designed the train station in Istanbul, a German architect. he went to what was called the School of Engineering of the time, and he was sent to Berlin in 1895 to study exactly at the Charlottenburg Technical College that you were showing. And when he came back, he became a professor in the school, and he founded the first trade association. He did several things. One was to theorize about what's a national style, like in what style should we build its version for the Ottoman Empire, the end of the Ottoman Empire, basically. He also founded the Ottoman Association of Architects and Engineers, and one of his later works was the restoration of the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. So I would imagine they must have known each other. I would imagine. So there's kind of a very interesting, that's one of the things I very quickly discovered just by, scratching the surface. So what I'm trying to say, with all these, on this kind of line or thread that I'm trying to point to is how did that garb develop, basically? How was it theorized? And maybe it was more than a garb, how that how do we understand that form, and what is its basis, basically, what's its theory? And it seems to me the whole there are several parallel histories here that are that are possibly very intertwined. So I think that's all I have to say. Thank you again. And
Thank you very much. I will call for the second response to Dr. Omri Eilat. He is here with us to provide his thoughts. Dr. Omri Eilat is a postdoctoral student in the Department of Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies at Haifa University. His area of expertise lies in the history of modern Turkey and the Arabic-speaking Middle East during the late Ottoman period.
אז אני אצא במחשב.
אתה רוצה פה?
כן, כדי שנוכל לשתף את התמונה. איך נשתף?
זה עוד לא עשיתי שם.
עשיתי. אוקיי, אנחנו רואים כי זה ככה. Okay, so thank you. Thank you for having me. It's very interesting to come here the second time, and this dialogue between historians and architects, I think it's necessary, and it became more fruitful, I think, in the past few years. It used to be, we mock at you that you don't understand Ottoman reforms, you mock at us that we don't understand the form. And I think it's much more constructive and still a lot more to learn. So Professor Greenberg, actually, thank you very much for this fascinating lecture and paper. And about the Ottoman-German alliance, you said most of the details and arguments that I intended to say. So I'll focus on the Jewish network and the Ottoman policy. So when we talk about German imperialism, which is a Weltpolitik at the time, and the philosophy behind it, which is a culture to make, which is supreme to enlightenment and capitalism, and this is the great competition on Asia in general. So the Baghdad Railway that Professor Greenberg mentioned, this is competitive road to the sea road ruled by the British Empire. And when we look locally and at these Ottoman provinces, that Haifa belonged specifically to Beirut, but we have the railway connected Haifa to Damascus, to the Hijaz railway. So it's relevant to these areas. So the competition on the ground here in Syria is German French. No British interests in the region where, I mean, side of Egypt. I mean, in greater Syria, they are smaller. So the competition is German French. So this is one part, and the second part is there is Jews became, and I say Jews, this is not exactly Hillside and this is not exactly Zionism, they are all together. Because in this period, after the death of Theodor Herzl in 1904 and the Balfour Declaration, this is a period where we have multiple actors who try to resolve the Jewish problem, and centered in most of them in Germany. So Zionist movement, this is practical Zionism led by Otto Warburg at the time. So this is one part, and we had the territorialists led by Israel Zangwill and the Hillside. So what's mutual, and so they are not rivals. They became rival around the Technikum in der Sprachenkampf, okay, in the Milchemet HaSafot. But before, they are quite close, and if there is something that they are really anti, they are all anti-Rothschild. Anti-Rothschild, anti-JCA, anti-French. So just an anecdote on how, and this is, they are really anti, I mean, both philosophically and operatively considering schools in Ottoman Palestine and in general in Greater Syria, and just an anecdote. So we talked about Gedaliah Wilbushevich, who was a student of Georg Schlesinger as well. So we have these chains of very flexible chains of Jewish network, very flexible networks of Jewish connections in Germany and within the Ottoman Empire. I'll get to it. So this Wilbushevich, who was the inspecting engineer of the construction of the Technical, he tried to assassinate. He wanted to assassinate. Actually, planned to assassinate Eli Scheid. Eli Scheid, the prime clerk, the prime official of the Rothschild Bureau in Ottoman Palestine. So, and it was very acrid competition. So this is what we have here. And the Ottoman Empire the Ottoman Empire is willing to accept the Jews at this time. I mean, the Ottoman Empire, we have the beginning, already had the beginning of the Armenian genocide, and this is not only an Armenian genocide, this is a Christian genocide. We talk about Nestorians, we talk about Assyrians. I mean, but there is also a Muslim genocide in Tsarist Russia, where both Muslims and Jews are being ejected from Tsarist Russia to the Ottoman Empire. And Ottomans are, of course, I mean, they take the Circassian, the Chechens, and the Dagestani, and they settle them in Muslim settlements in Greater Syria. The Jews are being, I mean, Jewish settlement is being outsourced, beginning to Rothschild, and later Hillside is a better partner, and in a way, Zionist movement. So Zionist movement around Jerusalem is problematic, but if Zionists will settle all across the empire, they're very welcome. If they are willing to be Ottoman citizens and serve in the Ottoman army, so they are welcome. So, and this was the agreement, I mean, official agreement. It was an agreed upon subject between these German organizations and the Ottoman Empire. So I want, so therefore, and so the technicum is actually, it's not actually, it's legally an Ottoman school. Okay, it's a Jewish school, but it's an Ottoman school. I would like to share. So this is, do you see it here? Okay, so this is the official. Okay, can you see it? Yeah. So this is the license to construct and operate the technicum. Okay, the Ottoman one, it says. And so the technicum was originally, it was not a polytechnicum, it was transformed to be a polytechnicum only after the Zionist movement acquired it and put it in 1925. It was supposed to be school for high technical education. It was something below polytechnicum and higher than the Hochschule and the professional Hochschule. It's something sort of like the old Bosmat, but a bit higher. Okay, so and so it began in 9th grade. Okay, it was 5th grade at the time because it's a high school. So and they needed and they knew that there's not enough education is not sufficient before 9th grade, so therefore they had to be the Realschule. So and there's an Ottoman school, it's a Jewish school, right, called Museri Tatbikati Feniye Mektebi. Museri is Jew, okay, Tatbikati Feniye is for professional technical professions, and the Mekteb is school. So this school, it was a Jewish one, but it was an open school for every Ottoman citizen. Okay, like Mikveh Israel. Okay, there were Muslim students in Mikveh Israel as well. Okay, so this is the logic behind it, and it's, I would say, it's a competitive to French colonialism here. And I can talk about that there, and you can see it in architecture, and I leave it to you, and in art as well. You can see that we can see the difference. But the most important thing is that these places are Ottoman, and the German-oriented Jews, they're Russian. Okay, Elias Orbach is German, but the very little Germans in Palestine at the time. So they have to be Ottomanized, but this is one part. But the other part is, I said that most of them are Russians. So I would like to shift here. Okay, so this is a very interesting. I brought it from your from the Technion's Yaakov Nesiyahu archive. So this is something very interesting. So in the cornerstone ceremony for the Technicum in 1912, sorry. So this is official. This is the official invitation. So every name marked red around it. You can see some familiar names, Tuvia Dunya, right? And you can see Dr. Yaffe, this is Hillel Yaffe, and Yosef Treidel, some and architect Yosef Barsky, and some of them, and Katinsky, this is Baruch Katinka, if someone knows. So most of them, I mean, they are part of Ottoman networks, but there is one very significant characteristic that we find in these experts that the Ottoman Empire embraced. We see endorse them. So we see that they are originally Russian. They acquire their technical higher education in Germany. Okay, most of them, the first cities that they saw in their life was Berlin before any Russian city. Okay, and they became Ottoman citizens, later serving in the Ottoman army in World War I. Okay, so I can set this triangle as Russian legs, German minds, Ottoman Jewish hearts. So and this is part of imperialism, and when we talk about communities in Haifa, so this whole communication was very higher in the very high imperialist level. So opposition was not opposition to these Jewish attempts to resolve the Jewish problems. They're not exactly on the high level. They definitely came from the local Palestinian communities. Okay, so but this is the story of the technicum. Is establishing the technicum is a story of imperialism and of competition, but locals are very welcome as students in order to it's not civilize them. This is not the language. The language in the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire is a sovereign state. I mean, the language used with Muslims in the Ottoman Empire is not the same language used with Congolese or I don't know, African other African genuine population. So there's a different language, but there's definitely Germany, while everyone in the world wrote the Ottoman off, as Sean McMeekin said, the Germans bet their farm on the Ottoman Empire. So, and this is what brought the region to World War I the way it did. And the technicum it's a very important thing in this network, and this is the part of the network of Alexander Baerwald that I thought to introduce. I actually have a question to Professor Greenberg, but maybe I should ask it while everyone while you take questions from everyone, because it's not necessarily part of this comment. Thanks again, and I think in this chance I would like to say, I think it's irrelevant. So this is a Kurban Bayram today. So Kurban Bayram is Mubarak Kolsun, and Eid Mubarak. Kulam wa antum khair. Let's see. Thanks.
Thank you. So once again, open the discussion. You can stay here. If anyone wants to comment, please do.
Maybe start with your question. We'll open
I'm
up.
so sorry, I have to leave. That's why I just waved, but I wanted to thank you. I unfortunately have to leave right now. But thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, because you gave me also this very interesting aspect of the Vienna exhibition of 1873, it was, yeah, and the publication. One should look in the Technion library if this publication is there, because he collected, I mean, everything he could get, especially in German language. So this was probably in German. You said it was in different languages. So yeah, this would be very interesting. And the whole, I mean, you both, I mean, you opened up for me extremely interesting perspective, and I understand that the Technion, the building there, and is, you can put light on it from different points. You can. I mean, I looked at the German connection more, because that's the sources I had. I'm not reading Arabic, so I'm always a little bit behind, and I'm lacking the sources of course, the Turkish sources. They are not open to me. Hebrew is something different, but So this was extremely interesting for me, your comments, and I thank you very much for that. And I will try maybe to get more information on the Turkish perspective. What is truly true is that the competition with France was very important. I mean, the Hilfsverein always saw itself as in competition with the Alliance with the French Alliance Israélite Universelle. Was really a major competition between these two associations. The Vienna one was not so important. They joined forces, the German and the Austrian, and the British didn't play such a major role in this, in the building up a whole network of schools, but the French one definitely. So thank you again for pointing this out. And yeah, and Wilbuszewicz is maybe also, thank you for the hint that he was I knew that he was at the technical high school in Berlin, but I didn't know that he was directly a student of Schlesinger, which makes him an ever more interesting person in this context for me. So I'm very thankful for your comments, and I'm ready to hear more questions and comments from other listeners.
Can you hear me?
No,
Can
yeah.
you hear me?
Now, yes.
Okay. So I wanted to ask questions basically to the three of you. Tulay is not here anymore, but you talked about them Orientalism, about the idea of the style and so on. And I was wondering, I mean, even Said admitted that the French and British Orientalism was very different from the German ones. And I was wondering how is it working with Baerwald's work, with the idea of the Germans, also what is underlying the German intervention in the Ottoman Empire. So basically, I'm really interested about the difference of German Orientalism in Turkey, and the idea that it's not, you quoted Ita, you said, if you want to conquer a culture, you cannot, but it seems like it wasn't conquering like the rest of the colonialisms.
Can we have another session? I mean, yeah.
So basically, I'm really curious about it.
About the different Orientalisms?
Yeah, about, because it seems like, and I've read your previous paper, and it seems like Baerwald was really coming to study, not only to use it as a superior one, but also to absorb it and to study it scientifically, but in terms of architecture, to actually use it. And you said that he wants to use Western technology only when the Oriental knowledge failed. So we can see how it differs from other Orientalist architecture and how it's substantiated historically.
Alona, it was with Baerwald, it was definitely not a fashion. And he also, in his German works, his German buildings or buildings in Germany, they have nothing to do with Orientalism, yeah, nothing. So it was really his belief that I think he fell in love, if I can say this, he fell in love with the Palestinian landscape and also with the buildings. He was a very good painter, extremely good painter, and he did lots of paintings from the landscape and of the famous cupolas, you know, the simple houses, as I showed, yeah, the simple cubic houses with the cupolas. He really fell in love with that, and I think it's because I did so much on Mendelssohn and Mendelssohn in Palestine. It's very similar in a way to Mendelssohn. It's also a kind of East-West synthesis that Baerwald was looking for, and like Mendelssohn said, the Eastern wisdom and the Western knowledge. Yeah, he called this like that. But it's very similar to Baerwald, and they were apart 10 years. Yeah, so Baerwald is still a bit more formal. His approach is more formal, concerns formal vocabulary, while Mendelssohn is looking more to the structure of a building, yeah, and not to detailed ornaments. So it's a similar approach. And what is interesting with Baerwald is that that in the end, I mean, he was looking for an architecture that could be for Jewish identity. And he thought the Jews returning to the country, they should adopt something from the country. They should get a home in this country. Yeah, they should and through their homes also. But in the end, you know, this is extremely interesting with Baerwald. He was the very first modern architect in the end. He built his very last buildings of 1929. They were Corbusian, very strongly. I mean, the House Phillips on Mount Carmel, it looks like a Corbusian villa. And so that's, and he said this is actually the solution. And so he came to the same solution actually like Mendelssohn. So I see them very in parallel. And it has nothing to do with the Orientalism of the 19th century when it became a fashion, yeah, and it was introduced by Napoleon and so on and so on. And it's a long story, and we could really open another session. But yeah, this is completely different. It refers to really studying the country's tradition and find, although I mean he gets stuck with this, yeah, and it was not accepted at all. He was called a reactionary in the country, and he suffered from this enormously. Yeah, but that's, maybe you can add something from your side of the, or it's a pity that our second commenter is not there anymore, because she's also an architect, yeah, and talks about forms, because this is actually a formal thing, yeah.
I had my question is actually, I can proceed what Professor Shiftan said. It's about Orientalism. So I have a sort of an answer, sort of a question, and so I'll begin with the question. When I look at classical Orientalist eclectic buildings in Greater Syria, for example, we have the Technion. We have the original Mahafat al-Hijaz in the Hijaz railway station in Damascus. We have more buildings that I can think of in Damascus, and I think it's Stefan Weber. He said on the Orientalist style that there was a shift in Damascus, but it occurred in Haifa as well, and other Syrian cities, that construction and planning changed from locals' vision of the West to Western's vision of the locals. So this is why we have Orientalist style, and when I correct, I mean, this is a question of me, and maybe more people can answer it. So we have Oriental buildings in Haifa and Damascus and more examples. They are not like Beiruti, okay? The Beiruti style is very French, much more colonial. So this is Orientalism versus colonialism. In a way, I mean, not in a, it's not in a Saidian way, because when we talk on Orientalism in the after Said, so it's different Orientalism.
Yeah.
In the French-German competition, it's in a way, it's an Orientalist colonialist competition. So, but we have it, and it's very similar to Jewish buildings to Jewish monuments in Europe, for example, such as the synagogue in Budapest, and I can think of more examples in Switzerland. So, how do you see the connection between how Jews start to perceive themselves as not only they perceive themselves, the Europeans, Christian perceive them as an Oriental people, and how Arabs in general, Ottoman Arabs, they conceive themselves as, I mean, they try to connect this world of Orientalism with construction of these Oriental structures and monuments. So I hope it's not too complicated what I try to ask.
I think it is complicated because the topic
is, so the question has to be
the topic is complicated. I mean, the Orientalist style of European Jewish synagogues is something completely different from the Oriental style of Baerwald. I wouldn't see there any connection. I don't know the buildings in Damascus, I have to say, but they are. But here, I think it's a German approach to it's kind of archaeological approach that Baerwald has. It's a typical German approach. Or doing an archaeological research on a local building traditions and style, and he writes many articles he publishes in Germany about his researches he did in Palestine, and through all his period that he was in Haifa. I mean, the early period, and then after the war, when he came back in 25 until he died in 30, during these 5 years, he publishes again and again on his researches. And yeah, but this is let's call it an archaeological approach. I would say he digs into the local ground. And
may I add something? Hello, Ita.
Hi, but Ron, I was just waiting for you because you did this work on
well, you know what I had to say anyway.
Yes.
I did try to discuss all these isms and compare them. There's an English version which you know, and there's a Hebrew version which is slightly more detailed. And there's a series of isms that you would use, and I insist on originalism as well. Well, part of the examination is the way Baerwald uses architectural motifs. So he's mostly Orientalist and very seldom regionalist. He quotes Iranian architecture, he quotes Egyptian architecture, etc. So this is nothing to do with the architectural traditions of Palestine. But on the other hand, he does refer in some points to local architecture. And there is a paper by Yossi Ben Artzi on his visit. You know this paper on Baerwald's visit in Palestine.
No.
Study. There's a paper by Yossi Ben Artzi some years ago about Baerwald's trip in the country. Of course, he's not writing as an architectural historian, but he's doing his best. And there is also the interests. One must be very careful with all these isms because they tend to acquire different meanings once put in different magnetic fields. And there is a Jewish Orientalism and the British Orientalism and the German Orientalism, I think the Ottoman Orientalism, and each acquires a different meaning. When you realize the interests of the actors, and when you are more aware to the nuances, the architectural nuances and the sources of the motifs, then it starts to make more sense. So if you really want to decipher the meanings of Orientalism, you have to go into all these details. I think the book of Stefan Weber was mentioned, was it? Yes. So it's interesting to look into this book. He's both understands very well architecture and also has the historical perspective and the erudition in Ottoman and Arabic publications. So it's very interesting to look. He also mentions there are Wilbushevitz and so on. So and the modernism, Ottoman modernism, is part of this discussion. So it's worth looking into his book. It's quite a heavy 2-volume composition. You can perhaps meet Weber in Berlin. I think he sits in Berlin. And I can't remember if there were other things. Anyway, it was very, very fascinating presentation. As it's always is when you talk. So
thank you.
Yeah, so thanks.
Alona, you want to conclude? Maybe? I think we are losing our partners here. So
we got late. So
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, you want to do some closing remarks? Alona, I wanted just to ask, what is you to plan more meetings, hybrid meetings, this kind of, what is actually, will it be all the time the same group, or are we going to work and connect? And what is the aim of this? You mentioned the 3 topics that you have, that's 3 issues, but how will it work? Can I ask this or?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, it's wonderful questions to close with, because so I wanted just to say thank you, Rita, very much before I conclude, because and I'm really thrilled that that you took the challenge and did talk about the early Ottoman period. And I think it raises a lot of things to continue to think about. Now, about the group, the idea is to create a series of workshops like this. We hope that the group will continue, maybe will enlarge. It depends on the topics of the particular papers. But we think that this format is not only interesting, but beneficial. So people can enjoy the comments and develop their work. So the idea is to try to have a rhythm. We'll see how quickly we can do, what are the intervals. But but to have a series of workshops and eventually to publish all the papers together after they are worked out according to the comments and then respondents in the group. So basically, it's to have a kind of a think tank about Haifa and about the related issues, and to enrich each other and not to work in the vacuum, but to actually help each other to develop our work. So this is the idea, and the end product should be a book that gathers everything. Does this answer the question? This is actually what I wanted to invite all of you to conclude with, the idea that you're all welcome to suggest papers that you're working on in this realm. Some of our topic, the three themes, some are more architectural, some are more general. One of the ones that we heard today are general historians. So the second theme of the relational histories is more open to things that are not necessarily architectural. The knowledge transfer is more around discipline of architecture or planning or more special disciplines. And then the last one can be also infrastructures and so on, so it can be interdisciplinary. But basically we thought about asking all of you to suggest papers, and then we can maybe group them in a way that will make sense and contribute to each other. So this is our goal, and I think today was really exciting. So it's a great beginning, and I hope to continue very soon. We'll be in touch with all of you. So any questions about this or anything else towards just as a closing? You're all here. Okay. So thank you very much, Edith, for putting this together. It's a huge work, I know. And thank you all for attending. And Moshe and Nita for the papers. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
It was great, fantastic work. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
נכון, עכשיו אתה בחיפה, אז חשוב.